Hi, I am doing a presentation directed mainly at parents, but certainly would like any students to understand this process as well. We spend a lot of time picking colleges based on factors such as the academic programs, the environment, the social life, but we need to really focus on the costs of college. So first thing, lots of different words you hear in the universe of college costs. You've probably most been familiar with tuition, room and board. There are other costs that may not be the same for every family, every student. Some people pay different amounts to travel to these schools. Sometimes you are an in-state student for one school, but out of state for another. And then there are lots of different ways to pay for college. So I'll touch on many of these today. So let's start with the SUNY tuition. If we look at what the tuition is for the SUNY Binghamton, the New York State resident would pay tuition and fees of about $10,000. A non-resident would pay tuition and fees of closer to $30,000. Everything else would be roughly the same as estimates. Of course, transportation is assuming that it doesn't cost as much to get to Binghamton from an in-state location versus an out-of-state. That's not entirely true. Some families living in places such as Pennsylvania can be at Binghamton way faster than somebody from here on Long Island. So these are the costs that they are required to list on their website so that families can get a sense of what the overall cost of schools will be. The items that are not all listed here would include things like insurance. Every student needs to have health insurance, whether you're covered by the plan at home or the school will offer you one. So if we use this model, any student who's a New York State resident would need to pay $120,000 for 4 years. And if you're an out-of-state student, you would pay closer to $200,000. You will do a net price calculator on any website for any college that your student is applying to. You will be given the option to create an account or log in. You do not need to do that. You do not need to be giving the college any information at this point. So you can do it as a guest. Often they will ask you if you want to do a detailed calculation or a basic one. The detailed one will ask a lot more questions about your family's finances, your costs, your expenses, may even ask about the student to touch on whether or not the school would give merit money. It is not a binding document. It is designed so that families can get a general sense of what this school costs relative to other schools. So as I had shown on the previous screen, it lists tuition and fees, living expenses, all kinds of additional things. So for an in-state student, roughly would cost about $30,000. Then if a family qualifies, that's the big if, there could be money coming from the federal government, a Pell Grant, the New York State Tuition Assistance Program. So in this scenario, the family is getting some help from outside of their own finances. So the only cost that the family will need to pay is $18,000. And from that, the students are able to take a $5,500 loan, and it brings the cost down. On the other hand, University of Michigan, for a Michigan resident, tuition costs between $17,000 and $19,000. That's because Michigan charges a different price if you are a first or second year student versus an upper class student. Non-residents, however, are paying way more than that. The books, housing, transportation, obviously they're assuming the transportation costs are higher for an out-of-state student. And when you add up what the typical 4-year cost to attend University of Michigan would be, we're looking at $144,000 for an in-state resident and over $320,000 for an out-of-state student. Now, the most important thing, you need to figure out for yourself what you are going to be able to pay for college. This has nothing to do with where the student is attending. This is something that I don't need to know the answer to, but as a family, you need to calculate this, and the student needs to know this number, because we don't want to surprise a student at the end where they've gotten their heart set on a place, and after they've been accepted, that's not the time to first tell them, by the way, we're not paying for that. So here's a chart. I'll explain it in a little more detail on the next slide. You are very simply going to figure out what the student has and what you have. And then you'll be able to get a number. So on the student side, they usually don't have a whole lot of money that they have saved. They're not the breadwinners for the family. And if there is the possibility you'll qualify for aid, you want to spend down their money. So when it comes to the income piece, students can work during school if they need to. That can either be a job supplied by the university, a work-study type of program through financial aid, or just getting a job on campus or in the neighboring community. Over the summer, they can work. Obviously, we want them to be able to spend a little bit of their summer money, but the idea is we're doing some assumptions that they can earn some money during college, during the summer, and then if they would like to take the federal loans that are automatic for U.S. citizens pursuing a bachelor's degree, then they can take out a total of $27,000. But they need to understand that after they graduate, they're going to need a job that pays at least $40,000 a year to be able to not spend all of their money on paying off their loan. On the parent side, some families have saved money, others may not. So if we're talking about savings, don't think about including retirement. Don't talk about emergency funds. It would be if you have a substantial amount of investments, 529s, and you also need to understand if you've saved money, you presumably like all of your children equally. So you need to divide that amount up over the number of students you have. Income, obviously, we don't know what the world looks like, but we make an assumption that families working at a certain level of income will continue that income. Obviously, harder to predict the future. So when I'm doing my calculations on the next slides, I am looking at perhaps a family that is able to save at least, or cash flow at least $335 a month towards education. On the higher end, maybe you are able to separate out and pay monthly 10% of your income. When we talk about parent debt, we really don't want parents to have to take on debt. We don't. You will have lower earning capacity as time goes by. You want to be able to retire. You have other children. So it is really obviously up to every family to prioritize what they want to do with their money. But I am always encouraging families not to choose the school that's going to put everybody in debt. So this is an example where the student hasn't saved any money, the parents haven't saved any money, and their income is about $40,000 a year. So under this scenario, the student would be working during the summer, during the school year, could take out the $27,000 over the 4 years. The family would be able to cash flow about $335 a month, so over 4 years, about $16,000, and assuming no loans. In this scenario, the family has about $63,000 to spend over 4 years, or $15,000 a year. As a comparison point, this is a scenario where the student has some money, maybe some birthday gifts, maybe some special celebrations, sweet 16s, bar and bat mitzvahs, you know, the gifts that they're supposed to send thank you notes for that say, I'll add it to my college fund. Well, this is when we are talking about using that college fund. This is also assuming that this family has parents who've saved in maybe a 529, a total of 300,000, but they've got two kids. So we're looking at 150,000 for this particular child. Still same current income for the student, still same future loan for the student. But here the parents have higher income. We are making an assumption that they are earning 150,000, so they can cash flow about 1,000 or 1,250 a month. So again, no parent loans. In this scenario, the family has over 260,000 to spend, or 65,000 a year. So how do we translate that to paying for college? Well, we just talked about the parent student savings and income and the federal loans. In some scenarios, again, it depends on the income of the family. They may get state grants. So in New York State, we have a tuition assistance program. We have an Excelsior scholarship, federal money, which are Pell Grants. And then we have opportunities from the universities, colleges themselves. Some could be loans, things that you have to pay back, and some could be grants, money you are just handed, you do not pay back. And then any outside scholarships could also add to this pool. So who is determining whether a family has need? Well, it depends on the school. There is a federal calculation, and there is what is known as an institutional calculation of need. As I mentioned before, you will be able to run those net price calculators, and you are going to do this because you want to make sure that the list of schools your student is seriously considering at this point, some of them have to be affordable. We always talk about academic schools that are likely for acceptance. We need schools that are likely for financial reasons. If you are all contemplating having your student apply early decision, then you must run the net price calculator. So how do we do the federal methodology, calculating what this family would qualify for in need-based aid? There are several different websites where you can put in details, information on your income and assets, your child's income and assets, and you will be able to get an estimate of what is known as the student aid index. Now, a student aid index is not what you are expected to pay. That's why part of why they changed the calculations on the FAFSA form, because it was confusing people, because the wording that they used was that after you did this work, you would come up with an EFC, an expected family contribution. And people said, I can't actually be expected to pay that number, or the college wouldn't necessarily match the figures to equal what the family would pay. So a student aid index is just giving some number that shows relative to other filers what your index for need-based aid would be. One of the things to point out, because people like to talk about, well, how do we protect ourselves? Can we move money around? And here's sort of the reality. The biggest factor that matters has to do with the parent's income. So in this calculation, the family has a lot of money saved in assets, maybe not a lot, maybe it is a lot, that's not the point. The point is that the assets are way higher than their annual income. In that case, they have what's known as a negative SAI. They are more likely to qualify for aid even though they have $100,000 in assets. Compare that to a family with much higher income and lower assets, and you can see their index is way higher. So when people start talking, or you hear people out there, financial advisors telling you to hide money or to buy, annuities, it's not the assets that are really going to impact your ability to get aid. And certainly we don't want to start talking about getting jobs that are lower paying just to qualify for need-based aid. So you will fill out a form, which they are beta testing to open October 1st, but they've announced that it should be ready by December 1st. So I will be updating everybody, but I always tell people you are not going to fill it out the minute it's opened. There is no prize for getting it done early, but more importantly, people start to panic because they hear, well, you've got to get your application in quickly. The money just, gets spent, it disappears. There is a very big difference between waiting 6 months to fill it out versus waiting a month. So I will go over the details of that as we get closer. I just will explain what it is you're filling out. It's called the FAFSA. So many people mispronounce it. It is not a FAFSA. That's like nails on a chalkboard for me. Free application for federal student aid. It will ask about your income, and for that, they will be looking at tax returns from the prior year. So when you go to fill it out, whether it is in October, not likely, December, we are talking about the tax returns for 2023. It will ask about assets as of the day you're filling it out. So if you are thinking about filling it out on December 1st, if we're lucky, I highly doubt it, and you have a pile of money because you are about to make a large purchase of several thousands upon thousands of dollars, okay, fill it out the next day. I will explain a lot of details as it gets closer. It's important to follow the instructions. The biggest issue they ran into last year is that people checked the box and messed up the application. So I will go over that when it's time to do it. And it asks for information about the student and parent household. So what am I going to have students and families do before October 1st? I will explain to you as it gets closer. Everybody, a student and at least one parent, if the parents are married and they file their tax returns jointly, they need an FSA ID. It's like a fingerprint. The student needs one with their email address and social security number. Do not have the parents try to create one for the students using the parent email. That will not work. If this student you have right now is a younger sibling, and you already have an FSA ID from filling out paperwork for an older student, you don't need a new one. I will share that link again as it gets closer. The situation usually comes up if families are separated or divorced. The key conversation here is they cannot live in the same house. When we start talking about which parent is filling out the paperwork, it is the parent who provides the most financial support. It has nothing to do with whether the child lives with that parent. It has nothing to do with which parent is claiming them on a tax return. It is who pays most of the finances. If a parent remarries, then that household, the entire household's income and assets are included. I get it. Sometimes when parents remarry, the arrangement is step parent has no financial responsibility for the child. I get it. That happens quite frequently, but from a paperwork perspective, they still require the information from that step parent, if that is the household that provides the most financial support. Some people may remember the old FAFSA rules and forms. I bring this up not to confuse the newbies, because if this is your first time, it won't matter what it used to say, but it used to require students, when they were filling this out, to confirm that they've registered with the Selective Service. The boy is 18 or older. The form doesn't require it, but just FYI, the government still does, but it's not part of the FAFSA requirements. It also will not ask about any payments that grandparents or other family members are making. It doesn't ask if the student has had any drug convictions. And as I mentioned before, it stopped using the words expected family contribution, and now instead it's calling it the Student Aid Index. And one thing you may have heard, it doesn't take multiple children in college into account. It's not a question how many siblings are in college. That doesn't mean that the individual colleges aren't asking that question, but for purposes of the financial aid paperwork, no, they are not asking that. Now, getting into the other piece of this, there are some schools, they have a lot of money. So they have their own ways of calculating what need means. So they will ask for more detailed information. They will have students fill out something known as the CSS profile. This form is part of the College Board account, and it will ask way more details. The student will log into the College Board account and will start the CSS profile. It will ask about the value of the student's, the parent's house, retirement, cars. This does focus on the house that the student lives in. Sometimes they will ask for copies of tax returns. Here, if parents are divorced or separated, they will ask for information from the non-custodial parent. That means that they will send an email to that other parent. That parent will have a separate login and cannot see any information. Neither parent can see what the other parent has filled out. So again, you log in through the College Board account. It will ask for this information, home, vehicles, retirement accounts, not because they want you to spend it, but they want to get a better sense of your family's financial situation. But it will also ask about debt. So if you have heavily mortgaged properties, they will know that. And again, no cross viewing of information. Sometimes a situation comes up where the non-custodial parent, not a great relationship with the student, doesn't want to fill out the paperwork. It is rare that a college using the CSS profile will simply say, well, all right, fine, we don't need that person's information. So it is possible in a contentious family situation where a non-custodial parent refuses to fill out the CSS paperwork, it may mean that that family will not get need-based aid, institutional aid from that school. What happens if finances change? So usually after you've completed the forms, or perhaps maybe you've completed the forms, but your income from 2023 was very different. The idea is these forms are just to create an initial packet of information for the college. Once those forms have been submitted, the family does have the ability to talk with the college financial aid office. So moving on from need-based aid, some families will not qualify, but everybody would like somebody else to help pay for college. So we start talking about merit money. And that really varies. It is basically, what do the colleges find worthy? So sometimes they look at GPA and test scores. So if you are a student who has test scores and a GPA that are well above the average of that university, they would like to reward you for that. Sometimes it's a talent. There are various merit scholarships for artistic talent, athletics, leadership. It really is up to each college to decide. And that also lets them be incredibly vague. So what they may have valued one year may not be what they value the next year. So how do families, students apply for financial aid? Well, that also has to do with each individual college. Sometimes it's just automatic. You apply, they're looking at the student's application, and they decide we're going to award you X dollars. Sometimes they make you check a box to say you'd like to be considered. Not a very difficult thing. A third possibility is essays in the application. So when I'm working with your students, there are plenty of places where they're starting to notice as they're filling out the individual college section, it will ask if they would like to be considered for, let's say, an honors program or a scholars program. And when they say yes, there is an essay that pops up. So I am always encouraging students to complete those essays. Then the fourth type is after a student has applied, some schools have additional essays that they can access from their student portal. So if I know about them ahead of time, of course, I'm reminding the students they will need to do it. But sometimes things may just pop up because they may add different merit opportunities each year. So when I am preparing charts, I have prepared charts for your students when they have completed a list of schools. One of the items, it shows up for you on an Excel spreadsheet. This is just what it looks like from my screen. You will see that there are some schools that give merit money. There are schools that, so looking at this chart, Indiana, for example, and this may have been from about a year ago, the average merit award is about $6,000, and 38% of their students receive some type of merit money. On the other hand, Duke gives out about 77,000 in merit money. But look at the percentage of students who are getting it. Very low. And you know who's getting it? They're athletes. So if a school is a D1, a Division I athletic school, their money, a lot of it will go to their athletes. So even Michigan, 14.7% of students getting merit money, the average student is really not going to be getting that, even if they have amazing talents artistically, fine arts, music, not really where the money is going to be going. So as I've mentioned, some don't offer much or very little. The other thing that you will notice when a student is awarded merit money, they usually somewhere, it will explain what they need to do to keep that merit money. So sometimes the students need to keep a minimum GPA, which for many students, not a problem. But I can't tell you how many times I'm reading online about students who, they get this great scholarship, they go off to college, and they're not doing as well in their classes, and they lose the scholarship. So it's very important to understand the conditions. And obviously, every college gets to decide what they want to reward. I'm going to just briefly mention why I think every family should be filling out this FAFSA. The main reason is because it is used as a baseline. And if something happens in future years, some colleges will say, well, we had nothing to compare it to. Now, the reality is with all the delays in FAFSA, some schools have started shifting and asking families to fill out the CSS profile. So at least there would be something online on record in their financial aid office. So some people may hear of the words need blind, need aware. I think that's less of an issue than people make it out to be. Because if a family doesn't have need, if you do those SAI calculators, if you realize that your income is so high that you are not going to qualify for need aid, then whether or not you check a box that says you would like to apply for financial aid, they can see you don't have need, it doesn't matter. On the other hand, if a family does have need, can't really afford the school without any type of financial aid, checking a box that says you have no need isn't really going to help you in the long run, because great, the college admitted you because they thought, admitted your child because they thought that the family didn't need money, but then you can't afford it. So I think it's less of an issue as a practical matter. The only time that it may make a difference really in terms of admissions will be on the wait list. So it is less of an issue when you are applying if you don't qualify for need-based aid. Now, I put on here, sometimes you can get a financial aid office pre-read. That is more of a possibility for smaller schools, for early decision. Most schools are not going to take the time to start telling you what you will get in financial aid until you've applied. But I would encourage anybody who thinks that applying for early decision is a possibility and you don't have unlimited resources, that could be something you can discuss with the financial aid office at that school. Couple things, mentioned these before. It is not true that you have to complete the financial aid paperwork October 1st. Last year, we figured out that pretty much the entire winter, no date mattered. But the reality is, if you are going to qualify for need-based aid and the application for it opens in, let's say, December, and you don't fill out the paperwork until March, yeah, you may lose out on financial aid at that school. You are not going to lose out on the federal loan. That doesn't run out. If you qualify, you qualify. The other thing some people may have heard at some point, that the order of colleges you put on the financial aid paperwork matters. For most states, New York, New Jersey, the order does not matter. There are a couple of states that if you're filling out FAFSA, you have to put a state university first. I will explain that if that applies to you. And applying early impacts merit money. So here's the truth to that sentence. Yes, if a school offers early action, it matters that you get the application in for early action. If a school is rolling, we want to get the application in. But when we say applying early, we are not talking about a rush to get these applications in before September. We're talking about somebody applying in November versus September or October. So we have to be a little bit more realistic. So just since I have your attention, a couple other topics. The students are in the process right now of logging in after the Common App has done their rollover. I am telling them to get on top of filling out the main part of the Common App. They will be working on the individual college sections. We prefer to use the Common App for schools if they are on the Common App, but there are some schools that they don't have a choice. So that will be part of the question. Some of the schools will offer fee waivers. The SUNY schools have a free application week or two in October. So yes, we keep that in mind when we are deciding which days to submit things. There is definitely an importance of applying early because I do not want students to be waiting until the last minute. Part of the conversation we are having now has to do with majors. It is important that if they know they want a particular program, in most cases, that is what they are applying for. There is no way to strategize and apply and think you're going to go in through some side door, because probably if that major is so popular at that school, they wouldn't have been the only people to think of it. And then they're going to be going to a school and not be able to study what they want. And as I've mentioned, scholarships, if there are essays for those, they should be writing them. I will be telling them to do that. They will be working on their main essays and supplements. And then when they do have interviews, many colleges will offer students the opportunity for an interview. It may be on their website. It may be when they apply, they'll be contacted. I have a colleague I refer my families to, and I will give that information. She will have a mock interview with students. She will meet with the family and the student afterwards to give feedback. And I will get you her email and pricing information if you and when the students need it. So most importantly, schools that have an October 15th deadline, that's their official deadline. Schools that meet that characteristic are South Carolina, North Carolina, Clemson, University of Georgia. I know there's others. I'm blanking on them at the top of the moment, but those schools have an official deadline of October 15th. That means students are applying no later than September 25th. That means anything that they are working on, they have to get me the initial drafts at least by September 10th and final drafts by September 18th. And you can use those same calculations looking at the chart for every single type of deadline. I tell students these deadlines. I email this out. I am sticking to these deadlines because students need to get these things done. Many of them are going to be ready way earlier than the actual deadlines. But most importantly, they have to follow these deadlines. There are a couple of different rules if we're talking about a student applying early decision, but the idea is I can't have students reaching out to me 3 days before a deadline saying, I need you to review this tonight. That isn't going to work. So that was part of the contract, and I will try to remind them, and it will be in your best interest too, for them to get these applications done. So I thank you all for joining me tonight, and I will let you know if there are other facts about financial aid.